Hi BookTube, my name is Juan. I am just one reader. This is my reading wrap-up for the month of September 2021, the second year of the COVID pandemic. I read 5 books in total in the month of September. Not exactly the best reading month for me, not exactly my proudest moment, but I've had a lot of work. I've been incredibly busy with some things that I've got going on professionally and personally. There's just a lot of really great projects that I have going on, but I still managed to complete 5 books, and some of them are pretty chunky and time-consuming. So I will be sharing my general thoughts about these 5 books, and I will be talking about them in the order in which I enjoyed them. So I will be talking firstly about the book that I enjoyed the least, or that disappointed me the most, rather. I think it's a combination of both. And then I will finish with my favorite book of the month, which was actually it's going to be one of my favorite books at the end of the year, of course. So let's get started. There will be no spoilers ahead. These are just some very general thoughts, and I might talk more in depth about some or all of the books in this video at some other point in the future. So, the first book that I will be discussing is the worst book of the month, one of the biggest letdowns of the year for me, and that was 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Wow, this was a misfire. I think Stephen King by now, I just can't quite think of him the way that I used to think of him, which was, a really good storyteller, sometimes not the best writer or the best author. I've always been able to see his flaws, the flaws in his writing, but I was still one of the people who really enjoyed the storytelling aspect of Stephen King works in general. But with this particular book, I don't think I can hold that assessment in my mind any longer. This book was just so bad. It was objectively, genuinely, not objectively, but in my opinion, it was a very poorly constructed, poorly executed, a very poorly written novel. It was just a misfire. It's a book that has a very interesting premise. It has a very interesting sort of opening. I think the first couple hundred pages were really good and engaging, but then the book completely loses the rhythm. It completely lost me along the way with ridiculously bad writing and awful character choices and awful detail. The amount of unnecessary and dull and stupid dialogue and detail in here was just baffling, and I almost feel guilty about talking so almost cruelly about an author that I have loved previously, but I need to say it. This is just the way that it is. It was just bad. So I ended up giving this book, I think, 2 stars or maybe 1 star. It was just such a disappointment. Very long book. It was not worth it at all. The second book was not very good either, but here I am placing it higher than the Stephen King, because with Stephen King I can just say, wow, this was a train wreck. But with this book, which is early work by Andrew Martin, I think it's more to do with my personal taste. I think it's more to do with this book was just not for me, and I can completely see that that's the way that it is. And even though many things about this book on paper appealed to me, and that's why I picked it up, because on paper it seemed really, really good to me, on the execution and the actual unfolding of the story itself, I just didn't really care for it. Early work by Andrew Martin is a very celebrated novel. It was highly praised by the New York Times Book Review and many other, critical, a lot of critical praise for this book. That might be true. I just didn't really care for it. It's a book that follows two characters, really, two protagonists, a man and a woman. You know, this kind of characters that I just find infuriating, narcissistic adults that behave like depressed teenagers, very narcissistic people with severe personality disorders. There's a lot of borderline personality disorder in here, as well as pathological narcissism in here. I am not the kind of reader who likes seeing pathology in characters in books, but here it was just too much, too evident, not to. It was impossible for me not to see these characters in pathological, clinical terms, and I don't enjoy that. But it was just something that got in the way. The story itself is a love triangle, and there's a lot of like very pedantic and exhibitionistic and narcissistic displays of intellect and references and high culture and pop culture, but it's very snobbish, very pretentious. I'm not saying that the author is pretentious. I think the book wants to be pretentious. I think it's actually parodizing that kind of, high intellectual but completely empty kind of discourse. And I think the book is successful in that regard. But for me, it was not a good enough execution of that. I did not enjoy it. I did not find it entertaining or interesting or compelling enough. It might be for you, so I would recommend it if you can click with the writing style. I didn't like the writing style. Sometimes it was amusing, but never really funny to me. So I gave it, I think 2 stars, but it's just not for me. Then I read a book that was a little disappointing, but it had some really good moments as well. Putting It Together by James Lapine. This book was a great gift from Steve Donahue. He sent it to me all the way from Massachusetts, and I really thank him for that. And because it's a beautiful object to display in my room, in my library room, or in my living room, it's just a great thing to have. And it actually has a lot of really great pictures. I think the pictures might actually be my favorite part of the whole book. There is a picture here of Stephen Sondheim watching the painting that inspired him to create Sunday in the Park with George, and I think this might be my favorite part of the entire book. So Putting It Together is all about James Lapine and how he united with Stephen Sondheim and some other people, but mainly Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine, how they created Sunday in the Park with George, one of my favorite musicals ever. It's a very, very important thing in my life. I actually have a copy of this Georges Seurat painting in my consulting room. It's very important to me. And the thing about this book that really let me down is that the book sort of goes into some places that I did not find interesting enough, like the rehearsal process of the play, of the musical. Some aspects of it were interesting. Some parts just felt like a historical document, trying to leave a historical evidence of how this came about, but I didn't particularly find it compelling enough. Also, my biggest complaint, which is very unfair, is that the book feels a little dull, because James Lapine's writing seems kind of dull, and the best moments in this entire book are when Stephen Sondheim comes up and, has an interview or shares some words of wisdom or some words of joy or some funny lines. When Stephen Sondheim appears, he just steals the show. It's absolutely wonderful. But sadly, that just sort of highlights James Lapine's sort of not very interesting style, in my opinion. So it's an interesting historical document, but it's not the most compelling or even interesting book about the Sunday in the Park with George. I gave it 3 stars. And then the following 2 books that I will be mentioning, I really, really enjoyed for very different reasons. So firstly, we have The Hidden Spring by Mark Soames. This is a book, a nonfiction book on neuroscience, psychoanalysis. So it's a blend. It's a blend of the most recent findings, scientific findings of neuroscience, and how that sort of confirms or makes us reconsider a lot of Sigmund Freud's original thinking way back when, way back at the beginning of psychoanalysis, back in that sort of prehistoric period of psychoanalysis, when Sigmund Freud was starting to cook things up in his brain before he came up with the actual psychoanalytical method. And in this book, what Mark Soames comes up with, which is just absolutely revolutionary in terms of a theory of the mind and a clinical practice, is he blends all of these things together, and he shows how scientific modern evidence confirms many things that Freud had already inferred with different methods, of course, with inference and with deduction and with different words and different ways of thinking, but it's pretty much the same. And so it's a fascinating book. I am a psychoanalyst, and I really enjoy. I am not a psychoanalyst who just focuses on the very psychoanalytical part of things. I also like to think about the actual physiological mechanisms in the brain and in the nervous system that allow psychical process to work. So this book was just very much for me. I really enjoyed it. It has but it has expanded my horizons and the way that I think about many things. It has expanded my clinical perspective, and I really enjoyed it. The only reason why I did not give it 5 stars was because there was a portion of the book that I felt was a little bit too boring and a little bit too dry, but the rest of the book is fascinating and very compelling. So this was 4 stars in the end. And finally, my favorite book of the month, which was also 4 stars but very enjoyable, was Fool's Errand. This is the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy by Robin Hobb, which is a new trilogy that I am reading. I am currently reading book 2, but book 1, Fool's Errand, was very good. It's not the best Robin Hobb book that I've read by any means. I think The Lifeship Traders was just all around a much better taste of Robin Hobb. But here, I just really loved the characters. I love the pacing of the book. I love the political implications in here and the whole exploration of community and exclusion and inclusion and protection. There are some wonderful themes. If you really think about it, they are in here. I love the characters, of course. Fitz, the Fool, Hap, Prince Dutiful, Ketrican, the Queen. There are some really good characters in here. The writing is beautiful. Sometimes it gets in the way because Robin Hobb can be very repetitive and very, sometimes she gets tangled up in her beautiful prose. And I think it's sometimes, they say that sometimes your biggest strength can be your biggest your biggest flaw as well. I'm not saying it's a flaw, but it can sometimes get in the way. This book was fine. The story itself was maybe not the most interesting or compelling. It's a pretty generic story, like a rescue adventure. but the characters and the magic and the way that the way that she explores certain themes throughout, using the magic and the characters and their interactions, was really wonderful. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was not the best, but it actually made me think a lot of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which is a book that many people dislike in the Harry Potter series. But for me, that is my favorite book in the Harry Potter series, because it deals with, with a lot of things that she's also dealing with in here, and the way that she explores, Robin Hobb explores many issues with, slow pacing and meandering scenes, and a lot of dialogue, and a beautiful prose and descriptions, and the way that she uses magic to explore those big concepts and themes and issues, and also the way that sometimes there's like a bucolic, I love that word, there's a bucolic sort of languid quality to the book and to the characters. I just really love that, and it's actually very interesting. I think Fool's Errand is very similar to Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, actually, which is why I enjoyed Fool's Errand as well. So that was 4 stars for me, and that's what I read in the month of September. If you have any comments, any recommendations, any qualms, anything at all, you can leave that in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. I am Just One Reader, and I will see you on the next video.